respect, I promise you that we will win. That's my main initiative, demanding our respect and taking it to Capitol Hill. Thank you.
So the question was, what are our top 3 priorities? In the short term, there's 2. The DC Voting Rights Act is pretty much dead. The compromise we had with Utah was flawed to begin with, and it's going to expire with the current census. So the 2 short-term things that are still on the table are budgetary autonomy and legislative autonomy. And those will make huge impacts in the daily lives here in D.C. And that's something that's still on the table. That's something that Congressman Norton talked about previously. That's something that we can still strive for. That's something I'm still a local advocate for, pushing for. But the bigger picture, in terms of where we go next, we're turning the corner. Over the past several years, we've been fighting for that one vote on the Hill. Like I said, that compromise is pretty much dead at this point. And we're turning the corner, riding the boat, if you will, back towards statehood. And what I like to think is, when we talk about politics and campaigns, there's essentially 2 things that motivate people: fear and greed. Now, I don't like campaigns that focus on fear because that's a short-term thing, and that's in the long run, that's not going to get you anywhere. But greed, that's it's sort of a nasty word, but it motivates a lot of people. So what I like to think about when I'm putting forward here is a new statehood campaign. We ask ourselves, where's my star? So when you look at the American flag, it doesn't represent you, does it? There's only 50 stars in that flag. We, as the District of Columbia, every time we look at the American flag, we just stand up and ask ourselves, where's my star? And that goes to a bit of the greed factor here, is that, we are denied something that other people have. Now, those of us in this room, those of us who are involved in the statehood movement, it's a higher level cause. But to everyone out there, we got to, let them realize that they're missing out on something fundamental, something that everyone else in this country has. They are represented in their national legislature by 2 congressmen and at least 1 representative. We don't have that. And the flag, that's the symbol of our country, is a slap in our face, because it's basically saying, you don't belong here. You're not part of the system. So those of us in the District of Columbia need to ask ourselves, every time we see that flag, where's my star? Thank you.
This question is for the incumbent. Does the office of the shadow senator have a budget? If so, what is it? And how do you account for spending?
Well, we're talking about the shadow representative, so I'll answer that question. So, in terms of a budget, there is no budget, there is no direct money given to the office from the District of Columbia government. 0, not $1. What we do have is those of you who fill out the District of Columbia tax forms, you can make a donation to the District of Columbia Statehood Fund, which is Schedule H, which I can tell you, not a lot of people do. So whatever money is collected from that, and I think over the last year, I think total was $20,000, which is then split 3 ways amongst the shadow delegation into our statehood fund. That money is reported. It's reported to the Office of Campaign Finance. What I've used the money for are outreach efforts. Spent some money in early 2009, for example. We had a large inaugural event, a statehood inaugural ball. We had 3 nights at the DC Historical Society, where we had people all around the country come in. We talked about statehood, we talked about all the issues related to DC, and that's the kind of stuff we took advantage of, because there's so many people coming from outside of DC to the Capitol to see the inauguration. It was a huge opportunity for us to educate them. So myself and other groups put together some money, and that's the kind of thing I spend money on, is things that will educate people about the District of Columbia and our unique situation.
If you had a budget, what would you spend it on?
Seems like people are getting a little restless, so let me just come into the crowd and speak a little bit. Well, like I said, one of the main problems is that the DC government doesn't invest enough money on statehood. We have to put our money where our mouth is. And we're up here demanding rights. So let me tell you what statehood would bring. If we had statehood, some unnecessary federal tax restrictions that limit the ability of the government to raise money from federal government buildings, nonprofits, and international organizations will be restricted. Let me tell you how much money that would bring in. $2.3 billion. $2.3 billion if we became a state. That could go to funding our safety net, providing money for education, economic development, providing money for jobs. That's what we're fighting for right now, but we don't spend any money to do it. So when you elect me, you're going to elect a more passionate, a more stronger voice in our government, letting people know why we need these rights, why we need to spend money on it, and what comes from it. So that's what I said. It's not about me. It's not about the incumbent. It's about you. And who's going to get you involved with this message? What's more important is that I'm born in Ward 8. And I can be someone that can show the city that there's more to Ward 8 than what they typically describe our young people. They can't sit and say all the young people in Ward 8 are bad when we have a 25-year-old U.S. representative that went to law school at Berkeley, that went to Morehouse, that went to Harvard, that's paid his dues. So what I want you guys to do is support me. And if you support me, I promise you, we'll make history. Thank you so much.
How have you worked with local organizations dedicated to voting rights to bring about representation in Congress?
Thank you for that question. That's a great question. I've been waiting for that question all afternoon. Well, my first job actually was when I was 16 years old. I worked for Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. My first boss is actually in here right now. It's Miss Sheila Gunn. And what I did was I helped to organize for DC Freedom Summer. So 10 years ago, what we were trying to do was get people that came to visit Washington, D.C. to know about our plight, and so they can leave and be organized. So I started 10 years ago working on this issue, and I'm coming back full circle to run another D.C. Freedom Summer as your U.S. representative. But in my plight to become the U.S. representative, I've served as the Anacostia Coordinating Council's representative on the Voting Rights Coalition. I worked with Michael Brown and the Committee for Statehood and Self-Determination last summer. I went to Philadelphia with our delegation and fought for D.C. statehood. I've been working with Free D.C., every group that supports D.C. statehood or D.C. voting rights. I've been working with over this past year because what we have to do is come together. We have to build consensus. It can't just be one group or 3 people fighting for statehood. We all need to be fighting for statehood because it's something that impacts all of us. It's going to impact future generations. It's going to impact my kids. It's going to impact your kids. So what I want to do is bring everybody together in a coalition. So what's important right here, I have 30 seconds. What's important right here to recognize is that I received the endorsement of the Gertrude Stein Democratic Club, which is the city's LGBT Democratic Club, and the DC Latino Caucus. What I want to do is put together a coalition. It's going to take more than just this position. It's going to take all of us working together. Like I said, it's not about myself. It's not about the incumbent. It's about you and who's going to get you involved. Thank you.
I'd like to make one point of clarification on Nate's last remarks. There was no endorsement in the DC Latino caucus. Nate, I will say, Nate got one more vote than I did. But there was no endorsement. Just wanted to make that. She got 50%. Anyway. So the question was, what groups have I worked with? What have I done? So I've been part of the DC Voting Rights Coalition for the last several years. And how many of you were at the march in 2007? See, that's good. That's a good show. Now, there was also a DC statehood event earlier this week. How many of you were there? See a few hands. We need to have every hand in this room go up when I ask those sorts of questions, when they ask those sorts of questions. So I've worked with DC Vote. I've worked with the large national groups like the National Council of La Raza, the ACLU, People for the American Way, the big groups that have the big list that get people out to make this a national issue. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse when I say this has to be a bigger issue than than just what happens in the District of Columbia. And the groups that I've worked with, the coalitions that I've worked with, are national in scope. They get the people motivated in their congressional districts, writing letters, making phone calls, doing the call-in days. Those are the kind of things that really matter. When we have things here in D.C., yes, we need to get our local people to know. They need to know more about what's going on about this issue. We need to get them more involved. We need to get them marching in the streets. We need to get everybody in those rallies. Everybody in Nate's Freedom Summers. Those are very important. But working with the large coalitions, the big groups, that big list, That's how things get done on Capitol Hill. That's how the pressure is put on the far-flung representatives from Arkansas,